Gordon, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's my pleasure.
Gordon Lownds, a former retail consultant and investment banker, was co founder and CEO of Sleep Country Canada. First and foremost, tell me about your journey with your struggle with, as you mentioned, cocaine.
Right. So I've, I've recently published a book called Cracking Up. It's about my cocaine addiction and my recovery. Um, uh, I My story is unusual because I became addicted when I was 48 years old,
Wow.
um, and I was a very unlikely candidate to fall into this kind of situation. I was a high flying executive in the middle of a startup of a very challenging business. Um, I was working, 24/7 kind of thing. And, uh, I'd never done drugs before. I'm well educated. I was, had good value systems. So everything,
Oh.
looked to be great in terms of my future.
That's incredible. So, I mean, that opens a door to so many questions because you tend to see people who do have addictions to whatever, and we tend to assume the worst that they never really had the right value system, they weren't properly educated, and it looks like the long arm of certain drugs just has no bounds. And why do you think you fell into that trap?
Right. And actually, if you could do me one quick favor, I'm having a little bit trouble hearing you. So if you can turn up your volume a bit, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Is this better?
Yep. That's great. Perfect.
Okay, great.
Okay. So, uh, we started our business in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I was traveling to Seattle once every 2 weeks to meet with our advertising agency.
Uh-huh.
And I was divorced at the time. My family had moved back to Toronto. Um, and one night I mistakenly went to a strip club to basically relax and chill out a bit. And I met the ultimate femme fatale. Um, and basically, I started to see her every 2 weeks when I was in Seattle, for a couple of days here and there. And it was a recreational relationship, if you think of it that way. It wasn't particularly serious. Um, and then in 1996, she arrived in Vancouver unannounced and said she was moving in with me. Um, that wasn't in my plans. Um, and I agreed to sort of try it out for a couple of months. And then within 2 months, discovered that she was quite a serious drug addict. And I've been with her for a year, and I'd never clued into, the kind of behavior that you would expect. So
Wow.
got her into two treatment centers. She didn't stay. She just wasn't ready to get clean and sober. And she'd been an addict since she was 16 years old. She was now 28. Um,
Oh, yeah, sometimes there's no helping people who don't wanna
right,
help themselves.
right.
Yeah.
So basically, I said, "You're going to have to go because I'm busy. I can't live with a drug addict. It's just it's crazy." And she said, I'll leave, but if you just try it once with me, to see how it
Oh,
makes me feel, and maybe if it can be more empathetic to my challenge." And I said, "Okay, sure." I've at that point in my life, I was feeling pretty invincible. Nothing had
right.
ever sort of taken me off course.
And you
And
and
I
you
figured trying cocaine once was not going to be the end of the world. And, I'd seen it
right.
on TV and movies, and it was no big deal. So what happened, she and I sat down on a Friday night and ended up smoking crack together. So my introduction to cocaine was already sort of at the university level. Um, and I instantly loved it. It was just the most incredible euphoric feeling that I'd ever experienced. Um, and it turns out that my body chemistry reacted very positively to cocaine, and that doesn't happen to everyone. So, in my case, it was the luck of the draw. So I loved it, and cocaine sort of, after a hit of cocaine, it lasts for about 20 minutes to half an hour. And then as soon as the half an hour expires and the feeling dissipates, you want to do it again because it felt so great. And so we ended up partying literally for the whole weekend. Um, and the other thing that cocaine did for me was it sort of supercharged my libido. So so on top of being a high, I was being stupid, and I was with this gorgeous young babe who basically wanted to party with me. So I went to work on Monday morning and said that was great. I can party on the weekends, and it'll be fun, and there's no problems here. But within 6 months, I started to think, after partying from the weekends, it started to creep into Mondays, and my weekends started to start on Thursdays instead of Fridays, and I
Mm.
started to think I was having a problem. But I didn't know what to do with it, and I was terrified to tell anybody about it because it would just damage my reputation. Is the way I thought
Right.
about it. And so I knew I was getting into trouble. I had no clue in terms of what to do. And then within a year of that first hit on a crack pipe, we ended up shooting cocaine together. So I was basically injecting cocaine. And so, I've gone now from university level to postgraduate level of drug addiction, within a year, which was a really, extremely fast, you know, fall into drug addiction. And I've known people who been crack addicts for 20 years and they've never injected cocaine. So I was just off the charts in terms of, of my extreme behavior. Um, so that's what happened. And then I was basically addicted for roughly 1,000 days.
Wow. That's just incredible. I mean, I wonder, it feels like you had your defenses down and you looked at someone who took drugs as being kind of in a whole different world as you. So you didn't even see the threat creeping out your doorstep and you let it right in. Um, in retrospect, when you look back, do you wonder perhaps if there was n- maybe not as perfect as life wasn't as perfect as you thought it was, and a part of that part of taking cocaine was kind of just a way to kind of stay like avoid whatever it is you were fighting, or was it just something purely euphoric? Period.
No, it's sort of it's complicated. I was clearly a workaholic by that time. So, and they say that workaholics basically work too much to fill an emotional void that they have. Um, so my entire life was wrapped up in work, and so the relationship with her was really just it was a rest or a respite from the craziness of working all the time. And so, and again, some people have said, like, how could you end up in a relationship with an exotic dancer? And I've always been attracted to people who have a little bit of an alternative lifestyle. So I've dated artists and musicians and people like that. And
It's like an
so
escape from,
her
it's like a
lifestyle,
contrast from your reality. Like you're so disciplined, you're working all the time, and then someone who's just purely living in the moment, there's something appealing about that, I would imagine.
yeah, yeah. And it was, as I said, I thought I was invincible, so I didn't think I was doing anything that would get me into trouble.
Mm.
And I thought, once I did it, we partied for the weekend. I sat there and said, "Wow, like this is fun, and it's a great way to relax." And the cocaine, it basically eliminates everything in your mind in terms of stress, worries, whatever. So it was a great, vacation for my brain.
Yeah, but a cheap win always has a price, huh? And where did at some point did your addiction start to impede or cause issues within your life?
Yeah. So, um, after I started shooting cocaine, my biggest terror was that people would find out that I was a drug addict. Um, and I was fortunate in my business environment where I was the CEO and we had a president. And my role in the company was primarily dealing with outside people. I was dealing with the advertising agencies, the manufacturers of mattresses, um, the real estate. So I wasn't going to the office and seeing, our staff on a daily basis. So it was easy for me to avoid interactions when I didn't think I could, pull off the charade that I was, having trouble. Um, and so, I did a lot of work from home. We were opening across the country, so I would tell people in Vancouver that I was in Toronto, and I would tell people in Toronto I was in Calgary, and I would tell people in Calgary I was in Seattle. So nobody knew where I was, and I wasn't really accountable to anyone. So that's
Oh,
how I got away with it. But um, you know, the using got worse and worse and worse, to the point where in May of 1999, so like basically 2 years in, I didn't think I could keep up, the High Wire Act anymore, and I was convinced that I would mess up somehow, and that people would find out that I was a disaster. So I took a leave of absence from work and handed over my role to my other business partners, and figured, I told them I'd be back at work on Labor Day. So I figured with 3 months, without any stress of the business. And by now, the girlfriend had gone back to Seattle. So I was entirely on my own. And I figured, without any stress and without the distraction of her, I'll be able to get my act together and come back, and life will be normal again. And the problem was, I was isolated, and I ended up just using more and more and more for that entire 3 months period. And then what happened was, because I couldn't show up on Labor Day because I was too messed up, it was 2 days late, and I know that people were going to start wondering where I was. So I finally broke down. I called my business partner in Toronto, and I broke down and just, I was crying. I was sobbing on the phone, and I told him I had a really serious cocaine problem. And I was expecting him to go, off the deep end, yell and scream, and give me the riot act and all this other stuff. And he surprised me. He said, "I'm really sorry. What can I do to help?" And
mhm.
I, the compassion that he showed, was the last thing in the world I expected, and it completely took me aback, and I didn't know what to say. So he helped me get into a treatment program. I flew down to Toronto. I was in treatment for 3 months, and that's, was the start of my recovery. 3 months after the 3 months in treatment, I was out for a week. I relapsed, which is what happens to a lot of addicts and alcoholics because they don't get it
Mhm.
the first time. And I was gone for another 2 months. And then finally, in March of 1999, I knew I'd had enough. And without thinking too much about it, I just got up one day in Vancouver, put on my clothes, went to the airport, got on a plane, and flew to Toronto. And as soon as I landed at Toronto, it seemed like I was done. Like the, the sort of compulsion to use and all the craziness just disappeared. And I said, I'm done. And that was the last time I'd used cocaine. Was in March of 1999.
Wow. Okay, my first question is, the lady that you were with, what happened to your relationship with her?
Yeah, she. I mean, it was really toxic, because I didn't blame her for my cocaine problem, but she was pretty psychotic, because she'd been an addict for a long time, and our relationship was incredibly toxic. And finally, she said, "Look," she said, "I understand. It's a problem for you." So she said, "I'll leave." So
Just like that?
just like that. And I came home one day from work, and she said, "I'm ready to go. Buy me a car. Take me down back to Seattle. Buy me a car. Give me $20,000, and I'm out of here." And I said, "Fine," like anything to get rid of her, because it was it was almost impossible to get clean with
And
her. And I tried several times.
you
But,
never heard from her again?
well, no, that was the other problem. So within 2 weeks, she phoned me and asked me for more money. And
Of
so I
course, that's
ended
how it
up,
works.
in 9 months of continual sort of extortion for more and more amounts of money, or she was
Wow.
threatening to call the media, call my partners, call my ex-wife, and tell them I was a drug addict, and that she was I'd taken her
That's
passport and I
horrible.
was locking her in the apartment. I said she was psychotic. So, I was paying her, and every time she phoned me for more money, it just drove me more crazy. Um, and then finally, she'd had some, uh, I guess, deals with some bikers. And she phoned me one day and she said, "I want $50,000. And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to put a contract out on your ex-wife and your daughter to have them killed." Um, so, so I, I was, I was in absolute panic mode. So what happened was, I called the Seattle Police Department and the DEA down there. I had recorded a couple of her conversations on the phone, so I played them the conversations, and they said, "Well, like that's if you want to press charges, you've got enough evidence there." And I said, "I'll let you know." And so I got in touch with her and said, "I'll give you the 50 grand, but I have to do it in person because I don't want to send that much money, by telegram or whatever." So I arranged to meet her in Seattle. I went down there. I walked in. She was sitting there with two bikers in a motel room with a kilo of cocaine, and they were packaging it up into smaller packages. And I gave her an envelope with $10,000 in it. And I took out my tape recorder and I played the tape for her. And I said, "If you ever contact me again, I'm going to have you charged with extortion." And I turned to the bikers and said, this girl, I didn't call her a girl, is like crazy and she's going to get you into trouble. And so I left. And on my way back to Vancouver, I picked up the phone and called the DEA and said, if you want a couple of drug dealers and a kilo of cocaine, here's where they are right now. And that was it.
Wow. I feel like there's two lessons here. So we talked about how you kind of had a normal life, fell down this rabbit hole, and we didn't yet talk about your road to recovery and how other people can learn from that. But I feel like there's two underlying lessons here is the problems with drugs, and that's very well understood to anyone listening to this. But I feel like another lesson is how it's so careful to surround yourself with positive influences and even like someone who can seem like a negative influence, but they're fun and they seem innocent. It's just like looking back on how, just try it. Just try it once so you
Yeah.
understand what I'm feeling. And that's just never ending problems from there. I mean, I feel like that's an equally important lesson to learn from your story.
Yeah. I tell people that, the key message is, you know, addiction can happen to anyone, any level of the socioeconomic spectrum. It can happen at any time in any manner of ways. So, no one is invincible. And, for me, it was the luck of the draw, but, anybody could fall into the same trap depending on the circumstances. And so the lesson is don't go there. Don't even take the first step.
Wow. Well, now tell me about your recovery. And you said you just came to Toronto and that was it. That sounds like a really good outcome because I feel like people struggling with addiction, it's like a lifelong battle. And
Yeah.
even when they feel like they have a grip on it, when life gets tough, things can fall apart really quickly.
Yeah.
Um, have you had
So,
any like need to to get back on cocaine? Have you felt like the pull towards it, or was it just done once you got to Toronto?
no, the compulsion had lifted, and I think my body had, to some extent, my body had just given up too because I'd beaten the crap out of my body. Um, but the secret to my recovery was I spent a ton of time in the 12-step community, AA, Alcoholics Anonymous and Cocaine Anonymous, and the medical director at the treatment center that had been at. I got along really well with, and he really helped me when I was in treatment. And I phoned him and asked him if I could start to see him on a private basis. And I ended up seeing him for a period of 6 or 7 years, once every 2 weeks. And the key thing that happened when I was in the treatment center, and it's fairly quite common for addicts, is that once you get clean and sober, all of a sudden you sit there and say, "Jesus Christ, I'm not okay. I've got some serious problems here." So when I was
Right.
in treatment, They said, you're no longer taking cocaine, but you're a little bipolar, you're clinically depressed, you're a little bit narcissistic, you're suffering from PTSD. So I had some serious mental health issues that I had to deal with, which is why I wanted to see, the addictions doctor for, a period of time, because it took me that long to get my mental health stuff sorted out. And the people in the 12-step community helped me basically with just not doing drugs anymore.
Gordon, what advice would you give to someone having similar struggles as yourself?
Um, so they say you have to hit bottom and be willing to ask for help. Um, that's really difficult for a lot of people, particularly for people like me who who perceived the stigma would ruin my life of coming clean about my addiction. So, in my case, when my partner, showed the compassion that he did, I didn't ask for help. He offered it, and I accepted it because I didn't think I had a choice. It was either that or die, and it was a pretty stark reality for me. And what I found in recovery, and the thing that frustrates me quite a bit with people in recovery, and particularly this happens in 12-step meetings, there's still a lot of whining and complaining about why they ended up with their alcoholism or their drug addiction.
Right. Like the
And
victimhood mentality rather than looking forward.
exactly. And what I became quite strident in those rooms, basically telling people, as long as you're a victim, you're never going to get clean and sober. It just doesn't happen. So you have to take responsibility. And until take
Right.
responsibility, you won't do what you need to do to solve the problem because you're always blaming somebody else.
What an interesting story, Gordon, really. Um, what else would you like what else would you like to say to anyone listening to this, um, and who even takes certain kinds of drugs recreationally and, has the same mentality as you once had where, I'm invincible to this stuff, my life is fine. It's just one hit, it's just one.
Yeah.
I'm just having fun. I'm just partying. What would you say to them?
Yeah. So um, the estimates are that roughly 10 to 15% of the adult population has a problem with addiction. And roughly half of those never seek treatment. So there's a hidden, cohort of people out there who are suffering.
Right.
It might not be debilitating in terms of their lifestyle, but they're still suffering, with some form of addiction. And so, um, you know, the message, my one of my key messages is, no matter how long you've had a problem, whether it's a short term or a long term problem, it's never too late, to do what's necessary to get yourself back on track and basically recover the life that you had, or in fact, in many ways, a better life. So, so the sad thing is the stigma of addiction is a major barrier for people, getting treatment or seeking treatment.
Right.
And and one of the things that I'm trying to do, and I'm working with a number of people in the mental health community, is basically to use my story to help try and attack the stigma of addiction and say, addicts are not always people living on the streets, who are homeless. They're people like me, and there are people like many of you, um,
Right.
who struggle, and it's a mental health issue as much as it is a physical a disease that can be treated.
Right. So, Gordon, how can people get in touch with you?
With me,
Yes, if
um,
they want to, maybe
yeah,
LinkedIn or social
I
media.
I have a website, gordonlownds.com. They can read about me and my story. They can reach me through the website. I'm on Instagram as well, just with my name. And for people who want an insight into what it's like to to live as an addict, the thing that I do in my book is tell the story from my point of view and basically take the reader along with my thinking and my actions. And I don't try and justify them. I just explain what happened and how it happened. Um, and so a lot of people have said they're really gaining an insight into how, this kind of situation can occur.
Thank you for your time and wisdom, Gordon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for helping me get the story out.